Hello, good morning. I'm Sam Candy. I am CEO of Responsible Futures. Welcome to today's webinar, Making Your Workplace Pension Greener. I'm delighted to be here. We are in the smart offices and I'm going to hand over to Craig Copeland. He's the founding partner of wield Financial Group and he is going to introduce today's event.
Amazing, thanks so much, Sam. Firstly, welcome to all the panelists. Really appreciate you all jumping on. Sam did an amazing job of setting this all up, which is, I believe, is your first in-person and virtual event live. Well, usually everyone dials in, so it's been a bit of a flapping in the background, but we've all been good. So we are partnered with Smart. Smart is probably one of our newest contributions to the wield Financial Group. We work with over sort of 450 organisations, helping them to their financial services. But one part of the organisation has been the workplace pensions, and since starting that in May time this year, it's blown up massively with our existing client base around the sustainability piece mainly, and then educating the workforces and the employers and the employees around the impact of having a sustainable workplace pension. So it's a great honour of ours today to be able to host this event and bring so many people together and organisations to actually understand the impact of how much money goes into pensions and the impact that can have on the global economy and the sustainability piece around this. So I'm not the expert, but everybody that's on the call in terms of panelists can ask the questions in depth. Sam will go on to tell you a bit more about if there's any questions and things at the end. But I hope you enjoy it and you take away a few sort of key points and numbers around workplace pension and sustainability.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we can't see Craig on the video there. It's not coming up, but he is sitting here and hopefully you can see him on the top there. We're now going to introduce all of the panelists and let's start with James.
Thanks, Sam.
Let's just check you are coming up. That's it.
Am I working all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, morning, everybody. My name is James Lawrence. I'm head of investments here at Smart Pension. So my role is to try and make our workplace pension that we offer here as smart, as sustainable as possible, whilst bringing the biggest benefit and maximising the amount of money that we can give to our members. And we have 1 million plus of them in retirement. So yeah, great to be here today and looking forward to a really interesting discussion.
Thanks, James. Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm the CEO of Pensions for Purpose. We're a member organisation with 350 plus members, including asset owners, so pension funds, insurance companies. We also have asset managers, investment consultants. And what we're trying to do with all of them is get them to invest for a positive social and environmental impact. Most people don't understand that the minority of their investments are going towards things that could potentially have a negative impact on society and the environment. And what we want to do is turn that around and make sure it's positive. So we do training, we do events, and we also do research. So check us out if you have time.
Good to have you here. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. Great to be here. I'm the founder and CEO of Mothertree. Mothertree's mission is to make it really easy for values-led businesses to go green and save money on their finances and their bills. Previous to this, I was on the founding team and looked after my bills. We saved the British public £127 million over 3 years, and we had the best ever deal on Dragon's Den. Mothertree's goal is to get £1 billion into the green economy, and to date we've shifted £2 million to work with the likes of Go Cardless, with major charities in the US and the UK. And through that goal, we want to make sure we are getting money into sustainable companies that can thrive in the next 10 to 30 years.
Thank you. And joining us virtually, we have Izzy.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm Izzy. I'm campaign manager at Make My Money Matter. For those of you that don't know, we're a public campaign, people-powered and trying to raise awareness and drive action around the power of our money to drive positive change. So I'm campaign manager. I lead on our public campaigning and also engaging with industry. So we use public pressure, building that kind of engagement and awareness from the public to drive change in the pensions industry.
Good to have you here. So I'm going to start with a question to you, James, actually. I want to understand the environmental implications of traditional pension in comparison to more green pensions.
Yeah, it's a great question to kick off with. So pension schemes are huge in the UK. There's trillions of pounds invested in pension schemes, and what that means is the pension schemes invest across everything, realistically, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to investment. So if you think about all that's happening in the world right now, things like deforestation is a really big issue in the Amazon forest. I think most people would probably agree that it's not great for the human race. It's not great for the environment. And people might be taking steps to cut down on their use of palm oils, for example, and shampoos and other things. But what a lot of people don't realise is their pension funds deforestation quite directly by investing in companies. So that's one example. Other examples are things like controversial weapons. So there's a number of companies out there that produce things like landmines and cluster munitions that are used, in the current war that we've got, Ukraine and Russia. And again, most people would probably agree that they're not great and not great for humans. So, but again, pension schemes are investing in those, and it's not that pension schemes are actively looking to invest in these types of companies. A lot of the time, it's just they don't know where their money's going. So they're not being active enough owners and not being conscientious enough. So really, that's the kind of power of pensions. There's lots of bad investments going on in pensions, and hopefully, can demonstrate they're smart, trying to be a bit different to that and be a bit more active and conscious with our money. And that's really what we're aiming for in the industry. So the power of pensions that we're going to talk about today is huge.
Brilliant, thank you. And Izzy, you've done lots of research about this topic in particular. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think James summarised it quite well there, and particularly on deforestation, we did a piece of research that showed that in the UK, for every saver that puts £10 into their pension, £2 of that is going to companies linked to deforestation. So that exposure is enormous, yet the awareness that that's happening for people is really low. And that's part of what we're trying to do, and events like this are trying to do is increase that awareness. Kind of stepping back a bit as well, when we launched our campaign, one of the key things we wanted to look at is what is the impact that an individual can have once they that light bulb moment and they realize that their money might be misaligned with their values and it might be having a bad impact on people and planet. What is the true impact that they could have moving away from those investments? So we found that for an individual, if they green their pension, it reduces their individual carbon footprint 21 times more than if they went veggie, switched to renewable energy and stopped flying. And that's kind of one of our hero stats, really, because when people realize that the impact is so enormous when it comes to their money, they then want to take action and engage on it. So kind of what James was saying is there's this growing awareness that people realize there's this discrepancy between what they believe and what they think is good and that they'd want to put their money to, and then what's actually happening behind the scenes. And just to add to that, I think deforestation is the key one, but there's also fossil fuels that's really relevant to the conversation around climate at the minute. And earlier this year, we looked at what the exposure for an everyday person in their pension fund is to fossil fuel companies. And for the average UK pension holder, that's £3,000 in their pension pot is going to fossil fuel companies. People don't know this. And when they find that out, for the vast majority, they're not happy about it. And part of our campaign is trying to raise that to the front and say to people, if you're not happy about that, you can do something about it. And I think there's no one size fits all, and there's no kind of specific thing that people should be doing, but it's about giving them the power of that knowledge and then giving them things to do from that. So it's great to see that this is becoming more and more mainstream. And I think for us, we find that making it really tangible and clear what that exposure is and what that impact of pensions currently is gets people moving and want them to take action.
Yeah, I've been really surprised to see that research. It was something that I didn't know until I started going into it. And, I appreciate the work that you do. I think so many people don't realize where their money is going. A lot of the people that I spoke to when starting this, they didn't even know where their pensions were. So that's why we're here, to educate as many people as possible. Let's understand a little bit more about why organisations should prioritise the integration of greener options for their employees' pension plans. Dan, you've done a lot of work in this space as well.
Yeah, so making sure employees' pension plans are lined up with their values and really building on what Izzy and James have said is really crucial. We've seen that by examining where pensions are going for their employees, when we realise anywhere between 2 and 8% of that pension is going into oil and gas, It's going towards deforestation, like James said, and we make that clear to employees. Most of them are not happy. So what we do at Mother Tree is we actually work to give employees and the employer clarity in terms of what's going on with their pension right now, and then look at the options across the market to what they can actually do to do positive good with that money, but also continue to get those returns. So kind of that holistic approach, but it's really crucial. And what we've seen is it leads to higher employee satisfaction. They feel great that their money's going to a good cause, but also that their money's building money, so that they can be comfortable in retirement.
Thank you. Izzy, do you have something to add on that? You know, employees, they might not know where their pensions are being invested. Do you have anything to add to why organisations should prioritise it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think two of the key strands of our campaign is firstly on that individual level, that impact that individuals can have, that 21 times more effective at cutting carbon footprint. There's also the same case to be made for businesses. And last year, along with Deborah Meaden, we launched the first of its kind research looking at what that impact is for businesses. And for FTSE 100 companies, the emissions of their pension is 7 times more than their operational emissions. So there's this huge discrepancy again with what they're looking at as their own impact, but not realizing that their money's got a footprint attached to it as well. So I think once businesses know this, often they want to take action, and then their employees find this out, and there's this kind of movement happening across, you know, NGOs, universities, corporates that are starting to look at their money. And I think attached to that is the kind of desire. So we found that almost 3/4 of CEOs and business leaders want to integrate pensions into their sustainability strategies, but they've just not really known how to. So it's great to see the kind of work that, you know, Dan's doing. Everyone on this panel is trying to bring this to the forefront and giving people the actual tools to then take action based on this kind of revelation of how much of an impact it's having.
It really seems to, you know, it's come to light to me that it seems to be that hidden factor that we're you know, it just doesn't come to the forefront as much. But what ways can aligning workplace pension with sustainable investments contribute to addressing climate change? You know, it's what brought us all together having this conversation. Charlotte?
So I think probably the thing that unites all of these is that this is about systems change. So you can try and fix pensions, you can try and fix business, and you can do this in a bit of a vacuum. But the reality is we all put profit first. That's how business runs. It's how the government runs. It's how everything runs. So unless we start to change our mindset around that, we do have a bit of an issue. And so the way that pensions for purpose works is what I would like to see from all businesses and all investors, which is it's the how and the what. So, you know, in environmental impact and social impact, we're not here to talk about social impact, but levelling up, just transition, that's all part of it. We can't really do the transition if we don't bring everybody with us. And pension funds is one of the places where we see this incredible inequality, you know, in pension provision. So we build it into the type of business we are. We're a B Corp organisation, which means that people, profit and planet are built into the way that we run ourselves as an organisation. But also none of our services are providing us as a need. There's like a use case. So nothing is built off the back of purely profit. And so the big issue we have is that we don't have anything mandating that business should align itself with people and planet. And if they did that, they would be sponsors of schemes that would have the same aligned incentives. You usually have advisors, separate advisors for the pension scheme. So the corporate, that's also part of the issue. And the other thing is, and I'm not going to get too technical around this, is fiduciary duty. So pension funds have trustees and they have a fiduciary duty to provide an income in retirement, which means that we focus on returns. And that's been probably the most detrimental thing, this absolute focus on short-term returns. So in order for us to really think about social inequality, think about climate change, we need to have long time horizons. We need to be thinking multi-generational, because pension funds are a social contract between generations. And, you know, that requires an entirely different mindset from trustees, but also members going to the trustees of schemes saying, this is what we want and this is what we're demanding in terms of change. Now that has to come in terms of what you're consuming and also what you're demanding on the investment side. So you can see why it's such a big issue to grapple with. You can't just try and fix one part of the system or another part, which is exactly what the government's trying to do. You put a plaster over here and then a plaster over there, but it's still leaking all over the place. You need big systems change. So that's what I would say. I think you need to see that alignment in business and in the services that they offer. That's what you should be looking at in your investments and through any business that you engage in.
Thank you. And do you think it's so important, that education piece? Because, you know, you could be the most sustainable company in the world, and yet you might not even realise that your pension is being invested into fossil fuel and deforestation. But there is another way as well. You know, we're talking about pensions, we're talking about sustainable financial investments. Dan, from your background, you've done a lot in the other side as well. Do you want to share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. We've looked in real depth at banks. So when I first set up Mother Tree, I looked at the bank that we were using to look after my bills, which was Lloyds. Lloyds have put £12 billion into fossil fuels since 2016, just over £1 billion a year. When we look at the 5 big banks in the UK, Barclays, HSBC, Santander, NatWest and Lloyds, and their affiliated brands like First Direct, we found that last year they put 27 billion into fossil fuels. And when we look at the world's 60 biggest banks, which includes those 5, they put 50 times more into fossil fuel expansion than the fossil fuel companies themselves. So to put that another way, for every pound that BP put into fossil fuel expansion, the world's 60 biggest banks put £50. So without that money, fossil fuel really could be a thing of the past. So for me, one of the key things alongside pensions is looking at the impact of the bank. And when we look at the carbon footprint of the choice of bank, so where that bank is investing, it has a dramatic impact on the carbon footprint of the company. So we looked at Google. Google have £130 billion in cash in banks. It's a lovely problem to have, to paying employees, for acquiring companies for tax purposes. And that cash is invested in just a few banks, and based on how those banks are investing, that cash has a carbon footprint. That carbon footprint is twice as big as the carbon footprint of all the other Google activities on their supply chain put together. So it has a huge impact. For Apple, it's actually 3.9 times as big. Apple have done a huge amount to reduce their carbon footprint. They put out a brilliant video with Tim Cook and Mother Nature last week. Watch it if you haven't. But they didn't talk about their bank or their pension. So this, you know, alongside the pension, I would encourage companies to think, okay, what about our choice of bank? The really, really good news is, when we do our research, we look at carbon, but we also look at returns and how to make sure the bank setup is optimized. So you have the cash available to pay employees, but you can also then make sure you're unlocking interest rates with green banks, so that you actually get money back on the cash you have. The one thing I would add, I don't want to go on too long, is we also look at values. So I'll give you one story. We work with a digital ads agency with 2 female founders, amazing founders, Emma and Amy. They've never had a female boss between them, which is ludicrous. They employ out of prisons and out of foster care. So that whole business is about equality. And Charlotte mentioned it earlier, we're not really talking about the S of ESG, but I do think it's a really important part of the equation. So what we did with Emma and Amy is we looked at their bank and we realised their bank is investing heavily in all white male boards, all white male C-suites, and businesses without gender equality policies. What we've done is we've moved their bank, we've saved them money because we've got better interest rates for them, but we've also made sure their bank is investing in places that are genuinely pushing the gender equality part of this as well.
And if I can just pick up on that,
Go.
this is why you can't separate out the E, the S and G, the environmental social governance. They have to be woven together. You know, we're an all-female led company, and you know, it does make a difference from a cognitive diversity perspective to have different people represented on your board. And also not just that. Part of the reason why pension funds invest in the way that they do is there is not enough generational diversity on trustee boards. It's meant to be democratized finance. That's what pension funds should be. But the reality is the governance structure doesn't reflect that. And so often when you go in to speak to trustees, they've got a short time horizon because they've got a career risk, you know, and that career risk is 5 years, 10 years. It's not 30 years. So, you know, there's an interesting case in Australia where a superannuation scheme, I won't give the name away, was taken to court by a 25-year-old member who said, you haven't considered the risk that climate change poses to me compared to other members. And that was upheld. The only reason why we haven't had that happen in the UK is because no member has brought a pension scheme to court. So all it takes is case law. So there are lots of reasons we say we can't do things and things are too difficult. Ultimately, you just have to decide that you're going to.
Yeah. And
Sam, just on
go
that point,
please.
so it's a point that Charlotte raised earlier on, and what's really interesting is that yes, views have to change across the board, and you know that might be a sacrifice of performance for the short term over longer term. But what I have certainly seen in the last 5 years, my background being a stockbroker, is that performance in the ESG funds has significantly improved. And you know, you can do a comparison against a Smart, who is the most sustainable workplace ESG integrated pension solution in the market, against the peers that are not even moving or only doing a small amount. And that clearly shows with the right mandate at the top and the right people who've got the right solution and the right drive to get there, guess what? The performance is also there. So I think things have changed. There's still a long, long way to go, but that was a big part for us when we were looking to, you know, make a transition or bring something into the group, was that it had to make sure that it ticked all of those boxes. And you know, the mindset and the strategy going forward is very important. And I think we cover it in a minute, but you know, just Smart alone as their own drive to be net zero against any other players in the market is huge.
Yeah.
It's a really important point.
I do too, and actually it does sort of bring us nicely on to the next question. And this was something that when setting this up and speaking to people that came at me, the most challenging thing is people think, well, am I going to make money out of my pension if I'm going to switch it to a sustainable pension? And James, that's something that's important to people. They want to make sure that they're still getting money out of their pensions, right?
Completely, yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's fairly simple. We want to invest in companies that are going to be here in 30 years. That's not the case for a lot of companies that we're referencing today. You know, big deforestation companies, big oil and gas companies, unless they truly make a change to their business operations and they work towards the green transition, they're just not going to exist in 20 years, and that's obviously not a good investment at all. So, yeah, I mean, as Craig mentioned, you know, there's some short-term variation in that. You know, we're going through a war at the moment, which is pushing up prices around oil and gas, and therefore, you know, you're going to get people saying, okay, well, we need to be invested in oil and gas. But if we take that blip and look at a 5-year period or a 10-year period, or 20, 30-year period, that's just not going to be the case over this time period. So, yeah, we are investing sustainably because investing sustainably is the only way to make, you know, good returns over 1%.
Brilliant, thanks.
Sorry, interesting on that point. So when we're sitting down with our clients now, it's really important because actually, back to Izzy's point around the 70% or 75% of business owners who are wanting to do something more sustainable with their workplace pension. Actually, when you then sit down with employees, the owners want to make a change, but actually what happens, I think the case that you talked about, Charlotte, with the individual that went to court, unfortunately, that isn't actually going right the way down in an organisation, because exactly that, they want their organisation to be more green and more sustainable. But what they're not doing is actually, when you sit down with them and ask them, the first thing they're going to think about is, what about my pension? And what impact is that going to have on my retirement? How much money I'm going to have? So you're so right. The actual educational piece is, I think the owners and directors of businesses know and they want to make a change, but it's the educational piece around the employees that, yes, they want their business to be that, but not necessarily if it's going to impact their pocket, which is a very, very strange dynamic to combat, which is exactly what we're facing quite regularly.
And Charlotte, you've got some examples of where you've seen the financial benefits?
Yeah, I mean, so we, well, I actually worked with the Impact Investing Institute in the UK on a set of impact investing principles for pensions. So this is about understanding that you have negative impact when you invest, but you also have positive impact, and you have the potential to influence that. So, you know, you have engagement in stewardship policies, you have the ability to go to your investment managers and say, we want you to vote on these key things. The difficulty is that many aren't doing that. They're using proxy voting or, you know, other sorts of strategies that aren't very effective, and only really by being active can you change company behaviour. The other thing is private markets. Private markets is where a lot of the innovation has happened, particularly when we think about agriculture, forest land, about technology, particularly renewable technologies, and we're underinvested. Pension funds in the UK are underinvested in private markets when you compare them to global pension funds. There's a lot of reasons for that: lack of consolidation, not enough money going into DC because we haven't actually provided financial education to individuals to be able to understand how to invest. And so defined benefit schemes, so final salary schemes, are now closing and therefore unwinding private markets exposure, which is really detrimental for what we're trying to achieve. And defined contribution schemes that are being offered by Smart are not investing enough in private markets either because of problems with cost. So actually, one of the best things we can do is use environmental impact stories, the stories that you're talking about, to encourage people to save more for their pension so that they have a better retirement. Because at the moment, most people have a hole in their pension. They will not be retiring on anything like they think they will. And we could also save the environment at the same time. So the two go entirely hand in hand. And I think that's what we need to better equip people with, is that information so that they're empowered to take control of their finances.
We've actually had a really good question in from Rebecca in our audience, and she asks, how do we know if our existing pensions are green with the level of greenwashing that's going on? Is there any place that you can check out? It's actually quite hard to find where your pension is being invested. So does anyone want to take that? That's a question that's come from.
I'll have the first stab at this.
Go.
So we run something called the Climate Challenge every month, which actually encourages people on that course to go and look at their pension and where it's invested. And the first thing you can do is, if you find the name of the fund that you're invested in, and typically, if you're with Scottish Widows or Aviva, you can log into that app and you can find the fund that you're in. It takes a couple of clicks. Once you've got that, put it into your browser, ideally Ecosia, because they plant trees when you do a search, but Google if not. And there'll be a couple of sites that come up listing that fund. I use TrustNet, and there's a couple of others, and that will show you the top 10 companies that fund is invested in. It won't show you everything, but it'll give you a really good steer about the top 10. And typically, that covers about 10–15% of the entire fund. James will know a lot more about this than me, but you can get a steer on it. So just from that, you can see, are you invested in BP, Shell, to the tune of 1 or 2% of your entire fund? So that'd be a way to start.
Anyone got to add anything to that?
Yeah, am I right to jump in there? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go on, Izzy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so at Make My Money Matter last year, we launched our first ever climate action report, and it's essentially trying to provide consumers with this kind of information. It's not linked to specific holdings or kind of specific investments of funds, but what it does do is look at the top 20 largest DC providers, so including Smart, a lot of the funds that individuals across the UK will be with. And what we do is we essentially assess their climate action against key metrics that we've pulled together from kind of consultation with people across industry, NGOs, experts, on what is the climate action that needs to be happening now from our pension funds to make sure we have a future that we can actually retire into. So we published that last year for the first time, and we'll be doing that again at the very start of next year, but with a ranking. So this will be one of the first of its kinds, really. We're going to launch it with a sort of consumer magazine, get it into the mainstream, and it will show for those top 20 funds, top 20 providers, how they're progressing on emissions reduction, fossil fuel exposure, deforestation, and really trying to get into the hands of individuals and businesses what action they're taking. Because I think that the question is so right, is that it's really hard to pick through a lot of this information. And, we've tried to make it as accessible as possible, but still people who get involved with our campaign will, email their pension fund through tools we provide, and they get bombarded with things back that it's really hard to have clarity on. And I think we've sort of alluded to this, but for individuals at the moment in the UK, it's quite worrying to engage with your money. So even think about these sorts of things. It's quite a tense climate. And I think what we're trying to do is really break that down and empower people with the knowledge to take action. So when we produce this next report at the start of next year, hopefully it will provide a lot of the answers to these questions that people want to know, and then also give them the next steps to do something about that. Anecdotally, we had one business who signed up to our Green Pensions Charter use our previous report to basically look at how their provider ranked. It was reds across the board. So they took it to them, said it's not good enough. We're going to put out a pitch to 4 other pension providers. They had them all come in and pitch, and they chose the one that really takes climate action seriously. That's going to start happening more and more and more when you have tools like this. So I know it's not the perfect thing at the minute, but stay tuned, and we'll be releasing that at the start of next year. And hopefully it really will see kind of the tides turn on that knowledge building for people to then take action.
Brilliant. Did you want to add
Just a
something?
really quick one, was just similar lines, really, just look at where your pension scheme's actually invested and drill down through the layers. So, you know, we try and make it as transparent as possible. We have a biodiversity fund within our main growth fund, for example. You can look at AXA, our manager for that, and you can look at what they're doing in that space. We use climate transition funds across our people. So just have a look at a few pension providers, have a look at the actual funds they invest in, see what they're trying to do. I think would be my main thing.
Brilliant.
You can have a look at so we work across the spectrum. So part of the difficulty with pension funds is you've got the pension fund, you've got the investment consultant they use, because usually they're the kind of gatekeepers. Then you've got legal firms that advise on whether they can make those investments. You'd be surprised, but sometimes legal firms can actually provide a bit of a barrier. And then you've got asset managers, and you've got asset managers, of different stripes. Now we have a lot of those represented on our website, so content for leadership, case studies from them. But we also have pension funds that have signed up to the impact investing principles. So this is going much further than just ESG. That ESG is a hygiene factor. Everybody needs to get over this idea that that's something amazing that people are doing. It is not. We should all be doing ESG at a basic level. If you're not doing that, then I don't know what you're doing. And then beyond that, we should be trying to have a positive impact. So the impact investing principles is a way of actually demonstrating going much further. We've got a net zero target. Hopefully it's on 2050 target, which will see us all in the 4-degree world. But some tangible differences, and we show progress each year. It's not about minimum standards, it's not about ratings, it's about real world and what you're doing and challenging and pushing them on it. So have a look at that. There are a number of DC master trusts, local government pension schemes, and also investment consultants listed there. So I think that would be really helpful. And we also have awards. So you probably can see behind me here, Smart won our best climate change member communication.
Brilliant.
So so please do have a look at that.
That's really good. And, I think that's the point of having these conversations, and often with sustainability, with ESG, with climate change, people do find it really complex. And, something as simple as switching your pension or your bank, these are simple actions that people can do. It's really just educating people that these kind of changes are going to make a difference. I want to talk a little bit about the obstacles or challenges that people might encounter. We've just said, is it easy? Can you just switch your pension? Charlotte?
No, and I don't want to make it sound like we can just turn those barriers around just like that. I think a bit like suddenly finding out the world isn't 2-dimensional, it's actually 3-dimensional. It's a bit like what we're talking about in terms of this type of systemic change is massive. So I'm not being trivial when I say, we should just be doing ESG as a hygiene factor. I know it's really, really difficult to do this, but difficult can't be the reason you don't do it. Mm. And so there are lots of different barriers that aren't just to do with you asking for it. It's to do with this layers of governance and also the incentives. So one of the things that I would say you need to ask about is not just what are you actually invested in? How are the people you're investing with incentivized to give you that outcome? Are they incentivized based on annual bonuses? Well, that's not going to work, is it? Because that's not aligned with long-term goals. So it's drilling down and asking really clear-cut questions about how the business operates, what their motivation is, what their philosophy is, and what they're trying to achieve, and then them demonstrating that they will do that. So if you go to an asset manager, get them to give you some examples of where they've said, red line, we're not going to invest in that anymore because it doesn't meet our impact criteria or sustainability criteria. That's what you want to see. we can all say amazing things, but I think actions show you a lot more than words.
I think part of the company's supply chain, you know, so it should be something that they're questioning if sustainability is important to them. What about banks? Easy to switch? Make
Easier than
switch?
pensions in
Is it?
general. So, but just like with pensions, we found a couple of things. So we spent about 400 hours now interviewing business leaders, sustainability professionals, really understanding what it's going to take, what's holding them back, and what it's going to take to switch banks and pensions. Because, you know, as Izzy and others have said in this panel, these are the two biggest actions that businesses can potentially take on a number of levels. What we found is there's an emotional side that holds us back that we don't really talk about, and then there's a logical side. So on the emotional side, we term it FOG, F-O-G, frustration, overwhelm, guilt. We don't talk about these things very often. You know, they're feelings we tend to hide. There's a frustration at big business, at politicians for not playing their part. There's also that frustration that it takes so much time. We live busy lives and it's hard to make time to actually look at these things. There's an overwhelm when you do have time to look at it. It's overwhelming, you know. I felt a bit overwhelmed sitting here. There's so much to understand, so much to learn, but there's also so much greenwashing going on out there. And so just trying to cut through that and really understand it can feel overwhelming. And then the last part is guilt, a guilt of not doing enough, of not finding that time. That is a guilt. Those feelings hang heavy and they stop us taking action. So that's the emotional side. We don't talk about it, but I think it's just worth voicing. The logical side is what we found is switching pensions and banks just sit, you know, on number 27 of the priority list. If it's not in the top 3 or top 5, it's not getting done. So it's fantastic to hear from the people on this conference and also the business leaders that we talk to that there is a wake-up call that actually these two actions leads to a huge impact in terms of the future we're going to get, but also the type of business that you're running as a business leader and the type of business that you stand for the next 10 to 30 years. What I would say is banks is easy to switch, but it is tied up with your business requirements. You know, each business has different requirements in terms of what they actually need from their bank. So that's what Mother Tree does. We work through the requirements with you. We make it really clear, we give you confidence and control in terms of that process, but then we go and do the paperwork on your behalf. It's what we built to look after my bills. We switched over 800,000 UK households consistently, accurately, year in, year out. We use a very, very similar method to switch people's banks and businesses' banks, but crucially, we understand the business requirements because it's not just, you know, switch from Barclays to Triodos, who are one of the greenest banks. There are requirements involved that have to be matched so your business can function efficiently.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, I was just going to say, so one of the things that I'd follow up with on that is that, again, like we've only sort of built this up to a small part of our clients we look after across the group, will you? And you're absolutely right. It's the people that want to make a change do it immediately. So in terms of, do people want to change and is it in the top part of their list or have they thought about it? Probably not. It is probably 25 or 26. But actually, when you do highlight the benefits of doing it, you know what, actually doing it is actually quite simple. So actually moving your pension, the actual process of it, you know, and working with a good system, i.e. smart in this scenario, is that it is actually very simple. But it's just that key decision right at the top that's the hard bit. But actually, you know, before we met Smart and we went on this journey, we were with Nest. And there's under the group, there's 5 businesses, and within a month of starting the process to finishing the process, we'd moved all of our pensions from Nest into Smart. So that journey is actually quite quick, but again, it's being able to have that educational piece with the owners and then wanting to make that change. And obviously, as you get working with larger businesses, it gets that red tape around. You have to get signed off by this level, But historically now, and especially with a round table event I went to last week, it's getting to the top quite quick. And I think people are realising that they need to make a change and it's very high up on their agenda to get things done. So I think back in answer to the question, if it wants to be done, it can be done and both sides can be done quite quickly, but the mentality at the top has to be right for that to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, it's coming from the employees, it's coming from the senior management, it's coming from the boards. As more and more people are starting to understand this, then it becomes an easier decision because everybody wants it.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make. And just start small on some of this stuff as well. There's huge changes we need to do, and they will come. But there's a few little things, email your HR team and say, tell me more about my green pension. Can we switch it? That filters way through to trustees who then have the power to switch pension schemes and make a difference. So, and if lots of people do that, they talk to their colleagues, like you say, the momentum shifts, and we will start from the beginning, and we will start to get these things done effectively. And it's great, so it's easy to do actually. It's just starting that momentum.
And there's that bottom up, which is members, but the top down is really important. As employers, we went through an exercise with the scheme, that we chose for our employees, and they had to sign up to the impact investing principles. That was a non-negotiable. So, you have to set some standards. But why did we do that? Because we're a big group, and because as a CEO, I go into the boardroom, and when I'm given flack about our quarterly financials, I'm the one in the room saying sustainability is more important, long-term focus is more important. If it's not happening at C-suite, it's not happening at all. That's the reality. And so it's not good enough to say we've got a sustainability team over here, they'll deal with it. If they're not in the room with the board, it's not getting done. So it really does need to be integrated at that level. So that's something that I would say also, empower yourself to know that you need the C-suite on board.
Just to jump in there and build on what Charlotte was saying, we've seen on both the banks and pension side of things that the process leading up to switching, or the potential of switching, is really impactful for businesses leveraging the power they have as customers to these banks or to these pension providers, and saying, we're going to switch if you don't do X, Y, Z, is really crucial, particularly on the banking side of things. Millions of customers switch bank every year, and it's kind of just part of the process. But when their key clients that are big businesses, big NGOs in the UK, stand up and say, we actually don't want to bank with you anymore because of X, Y, Z, and what are you going to do on it? That's when they start really listening, and that's when they want to change. And we've seen just this year ActionAid moving away from Barclays. And it's things like that really are going to shift the needle, and individuals can have a role in that as well within their own organizations. And I think exactly what Charlotte said, it can filter down from the top, but also the kind of grassroots individual action can marry together and really drive change. And I think sometimes in this kind of time that we're in, you can feel a bit of a loss of how can an individual make a difference in this whole system. But that's why I love the space that we're all in, and what we're all trying to achieve is that pulling these pieces together, you can actually make change in these big kind of corporations that are driving the climate crisis.
Yeah, and I think that powerful impact. It's funny when you said that, I looked straight at Dan, but go on, Dan.
Yeah, I just want to add two things on that. I love what Izzy's saying there. By moving our money out of banks, by moving out of pensions that invest in fossil fuels, we are speaking the language of the CEOs and the boards of those pensions and those banks. The only way they'll wake up. Nigel Higgins, the chairman of Barclays, he'll be 97 by 2050 when he set all the net zero targets for Barclays. It's not his problem. We make his problem by speaking his language, by moving money out of his bank. That's the first point. Second point, as a business, there's a genuine chance to have a competitive edge by making sure the bank and pension are in the right place. It leads to more happier employees. It leads to happier clients because they know you do what you say you're going to do. And we've even seen with some of our clients, it leads to more investment. So there are genuine competitive advantages through doing this, not only by doing good for the planet.
Love this conversation. James, do you have any successful case studies that you can share? I think it's a really good, actually, here's a couple of case studies that we just looked at, but where it's had a really environmental impact.
Yeah, a couple really. So we worked with one of our called private debt, which basically means we loan directly to companies rather than buying and selling their exchanges. And we worked with them really hard to get ESG as a base into kind of what they do as well. One of the things they do now is actually they'll lend at lower rates if the company's more ESG and impactful. And actually, if they hit certain targets around climate change and carbon within their own operations or diversity on boards and things, they'll get a better rate effectively from us as a pension scheme at the rate they can borrow at. So, there's a tiny bit there of kind of money we lose, but we're really investing with them for the longer term to make it work and make them a more sustainable company. And another one, we as I mentioned, we've got biodiversity funds. So biodiversity is hugely linked to climate change. There's lots of animals that are being made extinct, like African elephants, that help climate change. They pollinate certain areas, they help different trees grow in certain areas, they capture carbon. You know, we've got businesses within that actually go out and help, you know, fight for these animals. There's a company called Tornata in one of our portfolios as well, and they are putting wells into some water wells. So 1 in 3 people in the world don't have access to clean water still. I mean, you know, these campaigns have been going for 30, 40 years, right, with Band-Aid and other things and sorts of things. But 1 in 3 people still don't have clean water. So we're directly investing in people's kind of health in Senegal. We're putting water wells in through our pension scheme. So yeah, I mean, it can feel really intangible. You know, you get your salary, some money comes out of that, you don't know where it goes. It doesn't sit in a bank account, it goes into our pension scheme, that goes into a fund manager. They then invest it quite a long few steps, but actually there's a real impact that people are making just from saving in a pension or saving in a white pension.
That social impact, that S in ESG, we say, oh, you can't really match, but you actually can. It comes into everything. You had some other examples, I think, Charlotte.
We have so many different examples, but some that are particularly relevant to the UK are probably with the LGPS, local government pension schemes, because they're obviously being mandated to invest more into UK PLC. We have worked with a number of local government pension schemes to carve out allocations into their local areas and nationally around the UK, which is brilliant, because this argument that you have to be a kind of global investor obviously is important for returns, but the reality is that UK pension fund members live in, guess what, the UK. They don't live in the rest of the world. And so therefore you need to be investing in the place that you live, because as Izzy mentioned, it's not just about the retirement income that you secure, it's the world that you're living in, because that income only has any value if you're not living underwater, for example, or in fire. So I think that's the bit we need to get our heads around. So we go into trustees, and we go into pension schemes, and we do this kind of educational exercise on what it means to be a universal owner and why you need to consider impact alongside return. And then they start to invest in renewable technologies in the UK, into social housing and social infrastructure. And what they've started to do now is actually understand the link between all of these different asset types. Part of the biggest issue with asset management and a returns driver is you end up with silos. So you end up with social housing on the edge of a town that sits there individually, does nothing for the people who live there. And what we're starting to do is connect all of these things together. How can we make it green and make it work socially to encourage people to stay in the place that they grew up in? You know, how do we make those vibrant economic places to live and to work? And so I think that connection is what we need to start making, rather than taking individual case studies. You know, we need to tie it all together. And so that's been one of the best things that we've worked on.
That's right.
Just one point I'd just like to add on that. I think what's really important, and James mentioned, is that a lot of employees and employers actually don't really know how much they've got invested, or they don't really have much visibility on how much money is invested in their pension. And I think that's one of the great things that Smart has done, is they make it very accessible through apps, increasing your contributions through the app and things like that, which I think generally brings things back closer to home, because I think the reason why we have a lot of people that maybe still opt out or don't really necessarily see what's going on with the pension, but don't really know how much of what's really going in. They just see that money disappear and then actually they're quite frustrated. I think one of the big things around the relationship that we have with Smart was the technology piece. So that actually you can see what's going into your pension funds by the day. So you've got a real-time valuation of what it is. And you get the ability then to hear about the social impact of what that's happening. I'm always amazed every time I come in here. There's a new story. The elephant thing today is the first time I've heard that. But I think for me is understanding that. That actually it goes always back down to this education piece. In that, if we understand what that impact that's having, people will then understand that money is being invested for the right reasons. But I think it's really important that of that value of pot of money that you're investing, what percentage of that is making a difference globally and in the UK. I think that's really important. We've talked about a number of different articles. Why does financial education matter and when does it matter? So my academic background is actually psychology, and some of that is in child development. I've got involved with Red Start, which is
a charity that's actually set to not exist by 2030, because by that time they want to have got financial education onto the national curriculum. And I've been in to do some of their sessions working, you know, with children from sort of 7 to 11. And what we're talking about is teaching behaviours like delayed gratification. When you get money in, you don't gamble it. You know, you can spend some, you save some. What is compounding? Why does that matter? Is it more important to have £100,000 or to have a pound that compounds over 30 days? Most people don't even understand this basic principle. And the government will not support putting it onto the national curriculum unless they've got clear evidence that we need it, which just seems absolutely ridiculous to me. But you know, I've seen it even with my daughter is 6, you know, and we go through this. If you want a toy, what do you need to do in order to be able to do that? What does mommy have to go out and do? How do I earn my money? How do I save it? How do I invest it? How do I make sure that I've got some to be able to pay all the bills? If we don't teach these basic principles, how on earth can we expect people genuinely to talk about any of the things that we're talking about here? Banking, saving, investing, you know, we're doing people such a disservice, and we need to do better.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we have a client actually who part of their sustainability actions and social actions is to educate their employees on finance and investment, because even at my age, you know, I find I'm learning things all the time that I wish I'd known when I was much younger, and I would have made different choices. And I think that that's really important. It's why we're having this conversation today. There's a really good question that's come in, and we are getting a little bit short in time, but I think this is about companies that in the real economy, with employees making employee pension contributions, how often the emissions are associated with these pensions investments included in scope 3 figures. It should be category 1, right? I've had this conversation so many times. Anyone?
Bank interest rate should be recorded in scope 3, but is generally not. There's rumblings that there's going to be a kind of like financial scope, or scope 4, heaven forbid. But it will be important for businesses to report on these 2 things. I don't know what they'll call it, but there's rumblings that this will happen in kind of 2025, 2026. We will see. But either way, these just pensions and banks are, from what we've seen, from what Izzy's talked about and the panel, arguably the 2 biggest drivers of carbon emissions for every company. So one of the frameworks that pension funds have to use, so the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, we actually did a report on TCFD reporting by pension funds at the beginning of this year. There was actually debated in the House of Lords. The issue isn't necessarily about capturing data, it's the quality of data, it's what's being reported, and then the ability to actually action it. I think that's the difficulty here, particularly for pension funds. We then had further analysis that came out from the University of Exeter and from Carbon Tracker that actually the climate change assumptions that are being used are actually incorrect. So most pension funds are at far greater risk than they're actually modelling for. So what I would say is, I think the pension fund industry actually is going to be further ahead on this, because they have to be, because the stakes are so much higher from a risk perspective. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. The next thing on, what I think is really important, is the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So it isn't all just about carbon emissions. It is about things like biodiversity loss. And we need to be looking at how those are all woven in. Now, TNFD is going to have a far greater impact on corporates than it is on pension funds, which is good, because we'll get corporates to move more quickly, because there's this kind of legal and financial risk associated with it. So I think we're starting to see a standardization of all these frameworks coming together, and that will create a universal basis on which everybody can work. But I think ultimately you just got to keep pushing and pushing. Can I build on that brilliant point? So TCFD has been a bit of a game changer in terms of understanding what the banks are doing. And it's really encouraging to hear
TNFD.
Yeah. I need to get up on my coming in, and that will impact corporates. But that's what we do at Monetary. We look at where the pension is actually invested in terms of every company. We look at where the bank is investing. So even if it's not obligatory for a business, we can still get to that level of detail. But it is really hard, and I really do hope that regulation comes into it.
I mean, bringing banking and pension scheme emissions into scope, excuse the pun, would be unbelievable.
It would be
I mean,
unbelievable.
particularly for
Be
those,
game
for
changing.
those companies that need to buy carbon credits to get scope 1 and 2 emissions in heavy industries across Europe. That would be huge. So I mean, I'd love for that to happen.
Guys, I say it's still so fun. That's the bit that frustrates me the most as well, is that these organisations want to make a change. They want to, you know, embark on this sustainability journey that they're on, but still to this day on the pension side, it's still very difficult for them to get a number on the back of what ultimately should be the biggest impact of where their money sits and where that bigger pool of 8% of their salaries goes. That's the frustrating bit that I still feel very difficult getting my head around, is that surely this should be the first place where that starts.
And the difficulty here is also comes down to what's financially material and not, and which is why I think a lot of people have sought clarification on fiduciary duty when it comes to the pension fund, and why corporates feel a little bit hamstrung in terms of what they can do as a sponsor, because you do have to remain separate from it. You do have different duties.
Yeah.
So we need everything to come to line. If you want companies to start behaving in the same way, change section 172 of the Companies Act and get directors' responsibilities to be aligned with people and planet. Okay, that's the Better Business Act. So if anybody wants to actually support that, they can do that, and that would effectively make all of our businesses a bit like a and then pension funds need to be then, setting frameworks that do work with TCFD, TNFD. There's actually a task force for social related financial disclosures. I'm not sure if anyone else is aware of that. But we do need all of these frameworks to come together. And once you've done that, you've changed the framework of business, you've changed the framework of pension funds. I think all the things that we're talking about in terms of the bottom up are brilliant, and I think they will work over the long term. But if you want really huge change, you change the premise on which we do business.
Yeah, just sorry, I'm conscious of time here.
Yeah,
really
we've got a few
point,
minutes
because then I don't want to make political vote the right way as well on this, and engage with your MPs, because we don't want to turn into the US where they're banning the ESG investments in certain states because of who's in power, because of what what they see as risks to some businesses or some big businessmen in their state. So yeah, the political influence is going to be huge as well.
We have just got a few minutes left, and I do just want to go round everyone in the panel. I can't believe how quick it's gone, honestly. There are so many more questions, and this is being recorded. We are going to send this recording out to everybody. I'm getting people asking, will the recording be sent? Can they share it? Yes, absolutely. And we will take the questions offline, and when we send the recording, I'm going to send all of the links. I'm going to re-listen through this and send all of the links to everybody that everyone's mentioned as well. I'm just going to go around the table. Izzy, let's start with you. Do you have any final closing statements of anything that you want to add to how this conversation has gone?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thank you. This has been great. So thanks for organising. And just really takeaways that we can all have an impact, whether that's as an individual in your organisation, whether it's who you vote for, how you advocate kind of in politics. I think go away and take an action from this. If everyone on this call does that, then we can start kind of driving change. And really also money is becoming a mainstream part of the conversation on climate, and that's just going to grow, and we want to be at the forefront of that. So yeah. Brilliant.
I'd reiterate the same thing, really. We can make a difference here. Sometimes it feels tough and exhausting, and we've got a million other things to do. Actually, if we just start and we chip away at this, we can make a unbelievable difference to our pensions, ourselves, and the planet.
Charlotte?
I'd say my word is empowerment. This is empowering. Don't feel this is all about risk and this is scary and it's too much. It's about you having a financial future and having a world worth living in. So those two things can absolutely sit together.
Thank you. Dan?
First, Sam, thanks so much for hosting, and brilliant to be on this panel with the other panelists. My action is building on Charlotte's, really, so it's clarity. So feel empowered to go and get the clarity on what's happening to your money, both banking and pensions. And a shameless plug, we built a free tool for businesses and individuals to do this, completely free to do. You put in your bank, you put in your name in your bank and the rough amount you have in there, and the same with the pension, and we'll show you the carbon impact of that completely for free. So do go check that out.
Great. And Craig, we wouldn't be here without your partnership on this event. Thank
Yeah, I
you.
mean, obviously the panel and the conversations that exist without the experts. So thank you so much, and Sam putting it all together. Yeah, I think going back on what everyone has said, for me, it seems daunting, it seems scary. It's it's a mammoth task to change things. Trust me, I've been through this. We've onboarded 35, maybe 40 clients over to Smart in a very, very short period of time. And for us, that is because people want to make a change, and we're here to help. We're to help guide through that process. I think, as we've been said here, there's some amazing tools out there to make that happen. If we can be of any assistance in making that process, and I think it's easy at the bigger firms as well. I think we've touched upon that they're feeling like they have to do it, and the right people at the top are making decisions. But I think actually it's the SMEs and that can make a huge difference to this as well. Maybe they don't feel like they have to because they're not under the microscope, but I have definitely seen, and our team have definitely seen, that people do want to make a change, and the SME pot is equally as important as some of the big companies. And if we can make a fraction of a difference from some of the companies that we're working on and make an impact here for us, that's equally important. So thanks so much for all your input today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
We will answer the other questions. We'll follow up afterwards. And thank you so much to all the panelists for being here, and to you, Izzy, for joining us virtually, and to everybody that's tuned in. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.